this is the 8th tutorial for Python. This time we're going to be looking at two sample programs in Python to understand the different functions, and it's going to be particularly the define and return ones. So both the programs we're going to look at are calculators, but they are two different types of calculators. I wanted to show you both in the same video because the code is quite similar. So first let's look at this simple calculator, right? All it does is it either adds, subtracts, multiplies, or divides two values, right? So before I actually explain each line of code, I want to run this program so that you guys kind of understand what the output is supposed to be. So first it asks me select the operation. So it says 1 add, 2 subtract, 3 multiply, and 4 divide. So let's select 3 multiply. Let's say 15 is my first number and 2 is my second number. So it gives me 15 into 2, which is 30, right? And I can run this again, and I can try it with a different one. So let's try 2. So subtract, I can say 60 minus 30, which would give me 30, right? 60 minus 30 would give me 30. So that's pretty much it. That's pretty much all this calculator does. So now let's break down the code. So the first part over here, where we're basically defining functions, all we're doing is we're creating 4 different functions: add, subtract, multiply, and divide. Now, basically what this is going to do is that, let's say I have add, and in the brackets I put like 3 and 4. What this is going to do is it's basically going to return x plus y. So if this is x and this is y, it's going to say 3 plus 4, and that's what's it's going to evaluate down to 3 plus 4, which would give me 7. Then it would be the same for subtract. So let's say instead of add we had subtract, right? So let's say we had subtract 3 and 4, then do 3 minus 4, which would give me negative 1, right? Similarly, we could do it multiply, which would give us 12. We could even divide it. 3 divided by 4 give us 0.75, and so on, right? But yeah, so basically that's what each of these functions is going to do, and I will explain to you why we've created these functions a little bit later. So the next part over here, where we have print, these are basically all simple print functions, basically prints all of this stuff. One question a few of you may have is that why have we why have we created 5 different print functions when they're all print, so they can just be clubbed into one print function, right? Well, technically, yes, you can do that, but the programmer probably wanted to, add line breaks, considering that it's a list, which is why we have 5 different print functions over here, right? Okay. Then the next part, we're creating a variable. We're initializing a variable, which is called choice. Now over here, we're asking for input, right? Now this is probably something that we haven't really learned yet. So usually we leave the parentheses empty, but over here we filled it with a string value. Basically, it's really not that complicated. What it's going to do is it's going to print this part first. It's going to print enter choice first, and then on the same line, it's going to ask you for an input. Now I don't know if you guys have noticed this, but usually when you put input with the empty bracket, what's going to happen is that whatever you have on the previous line, it's going to print that, and then afterwards on the next line it's going to ask you for your input. Basically what this does is it's going to print whatever, and then on the same line itself you're going to have the input option, right? Then we have 2 other variables that are being created. So we have num1 and num2. Now again, basically what it's going to do is it's going to print this part first, then it's going to ask you for your input on the same line, and then it's going to convert that input to an integer. Now, I don't know if you guys, again, I don't know if you remember, but basically by default what happens is that Python is going to store that input as a string in the variable, right? Unless you specify to store it as something else. Here, by saying int, we are specifying that no, do not save it as a string, save it as an integer, right? It should be an integer value. Now, by saving it as an integer, basically it allows us to do each and every one of these functions, right? Because you cannot divide a string by another, or divide an integer by a string, or anything, right? Which is why we have the same thing over here, right? We have we've specified it to be an integer. We've converted these inputs to an integer. Okay. Right, so the next part, now we have flow control statements over here, if, elif, and else. So the first part which says if choice is equal to 1. Now 1 is addition according to this, which is why you say print num1 plus num2, and then we say add whatever. Now this is probably another thing that we haven't learned yet. So if you recall, we cannot really add a string to an integer. So usually what we do, right, is if we have a variable, we do num1 plus, well, the variable name plus the string. Now that's because num1 would usually be stored as a string. However, over here we are storing it as an integer value, right? It's an integer data type, which is why we cannot use this plus. Instead, we have to use a comma. And it's basically going to do the same thing, right? It's going to print num1, then it's going to print plus, then it's going to print num2, and then equal to sign, and then whatever, right? But basically, it's going to do the same thing. It's just over here, instead of using plus, we use the comma because, of course, we cannot add a string to an integer. Okay, then we have this part of our print command. Over here we have a statement which is add num1, num2. Basically this num1 is going to be our x and num2 is going to be our y. So honestly, actually, let's consider it. If we have multiplication and addition, whether num1 is x or y, it's not really going to matter, right? Because it's going to give you the same answer. However, if you have where you have subtraction, it's going to matter, right? Even if where you have division, because let's say you have 3 and 2. If you want to subtract 3 minus 2, it's going to give you 1. If you want to subtract 2 minus 3, it's going to give you negative 1. So the answers are definitely going to be different, right? And the same thing goes for divide, which is why we need to specify over here that x is equal to num1, and we need to keep that standardized over here, right? So num1 is equal to x, num2 is equal to y, right? So that's basically what's going to happen. So here we're going to, let's say we have divide num1, num2. It's going to first divide num1 by num2, and then it's going to print that evaluated answer, right? So if num1 was, or wait, here, we have it here as well. Num1 in this case for the subtraction was 60, num2 was 30. So it subtracts, so it basically it does 60 minus 30, and then it prints 30, right? Okay, now the last part of this, which is else, is the else statement, right? So here what we've done is in each case it's either equal to 1, 2, 3, or 4. We haven't really specified what if a person enters 5 or 6 by accident, or what if the person enters 10, right? Well, obviously we don't have 10 operations, we don't have 5 or 6 operations either, so that's why it's just going to say invalid input, right? So I hope that's clear with you guys now, and I hope you've understood why we use the define functions. Well, actually, hold on. There's actually a different way to do this as well. So let's say you did want to use this. What you could actually do is you could actually create a new variable, and you could say answer is equal to num1 plus num2. And instead of using this add part, you could have just said answer, right? So you could actually just say that, because essentially it's going to give you the same answer, right? It's going if num1 is 3 and num2 is 4, it's going to do 3 plus 4, which is 7, and an answer would be equal to 7 then, right? So then you just put answer over here. So it would technically evaluate to the same thing. So this is a second way to do this, but usually we tend to go with a more efficient way, which is, in this case, it would be defining the functions and creating these new functions. Because let's say you had to add another part to the calculator, like this is a pretty simple calculator, but along with this, if you wanted to add another mode, like let's say we wanted to add a sequencing mode, then in that case we would need to use these multiple times, and that's why it would just be much easier if we just created the functions in the beginning itself, right? Which is technically why we do this, right? Now, another thing that I kind of want to clarify, which I don't know if you guys might think this, but basically over here, some of you might think that why can't we just do num1 plus num2? They're integers anyway, so we just add them, and that would like give whatever the result, right? But here, if you remember, saying num1 plus num2 as the variable, what it's going to do is that it's just going to print them together, right? So we usually don't do this, okay? Instead, we just keep it to add, and then we do that, right? So through this program, I'm hoping that you guys have learned three main things. So first of all, the importance of the define function and the return function, so the importance of actually creating functions. Second thing is that there are multiple ways to do something, right? There are multiple ways to write the code, and they would definitely lead, there are multiple ways, and they would basically give the same output, right? But there, in a lot of situations, there are some that are much more efficient, much shorter, and so they just become a lot easier to write as well. Okay, so there are multiple ways to do to write the code, but sometimes it's just more efficient, and so we stick to one standard way. All right, and the third thing that I wanted you guys to learn was basically about the kind of other minor details, which I don't think, which we kind of sort of covered, which is about, you know, the input part over here, and then the commas in the print function, and all of those sorts of things. Okay, so I hope you guys understood that. Let's move on to the second program now. So here is our second program. Now this second one is a bit more complicated, and this is not only in terms of coding but also mathematically speaking. Now what this program does is it actually generates either an arithmetic or geometric sequence based on what you choose. So what the audience chooses, right? You can tell the program how many values of this sequence you want it to display, so how many terms you want it to display, and you can even input the formula. So actually, let me run this for you again so that you guys kind of understand what exactly is going to happen and what the code should be doing. Okay, so this is a sequence calculator. Please enter the operation in words, only multiplication, division, addition, and subtraction. So here, let's pick addition. Now it asks me, you've entered addition. Is this correct? So let me say no, because maybe that's not correct. Now let's say multiplication. And let's say yes, right? So now it tells me, it gives me an explanation, right? It gives me an explanation as to what exactly is going to happen. So it tells me that the first digit is the first term of the sequence. So, and the second digit is basically going to be what you multiply the first term by. So each term will be the product of the previous term and the second digit. So please enter the following. So the first digit, let's say we want to start the sequence on 6. Now the second digit, let's say I want to multiply 6 by 3. And let's say I want like 8 terms. Now you can enter literally as many terms as you want. Like you can enter 1,000, you can even enter 1,000,000 or 1,000,000,000, and Python will still give you all of the answers. Like, and it'll give it to you much faster than you can calculate it yourself, right? But for now, let's just stick to 8. So here we go. So we have 6 into 3, 18, 18 into 3, 54, 54 into 3, 162, and so on, basically, all right? So this is what the sequence looks like. This is going to be a geometric sequence because there's a common ratio, whereas in an arithmetic sequence you have a common difference, right? So this is going to be a geometric sequence. Okay, so now let's run it again, and same, let's make an arithmetic sequence. So to do arithmetic, we're gonna say, let's say subtraction this time, or no, let's do addition. So yes. Okay, so each term is the answer of the previous term added to the second digit. The first digit is the first term of the sequence. So let's put the first term as 12. And then the second digit, so each time I want it to be added by 5. That should be my factor. Now let's say I want 6 terms this time. So now over here, what's happening is that along with the answer, I'm also getting the working. And yeah, and the working, actually, I have told Python to print it, right? It's explicitly been told to the program that print the working. And I'll show you that later, okay? And how I've done that. Anyway, so over here, these are all of the answers that I've gotten. 12, 17, 22, 27, 32, 37. So 12 plus 5, 17 plus 5, 22 plus 5, and basically so on. Now let's just check the working for the maths. So again, in the first video, I had told you guys that Python will follow an order of operations, and it's the same as in maths, like actual mathematics. So it's like BODMAS or PEDMAS, I guess, whichever ones you guys follow. So first it's going to evaluate this part. So it's going to do 0 into 5, which would give us 0 plus 12, so 12. The 1 into 5, which is 5 plus 12, 17, and so on, right? So that's basically how this program works. It gives you a sequence, and you can enter as many terms as you want. And it's pretty quick, actually. It's pretty interesting. But yeah. Okay, now let's just move on, and let's actually break down the code this time. Okay. So the first part, it just says this is a sequence calculator, and then we have, again, we're creating these functions, right? And again, I think I've already explained to you why this is important, so I'm not going to dwell on that too much. So let's move on, I guess. Then it asks you, please enter the operation in words, only multiplication, division, whatever. And over here we have O as the input. I know the variable name may not be as, descriptive or anything, but I've just put it as O for now. So here, O is basically whichever operation you choose, right? Then print, you have entered plus O. Is this correct? Now, O is basically like either multiplication, division, addition, or subtraction. So that's what it's going to print. Then it asks me, so is this correct? So I'm going to say either yes or no in my input. So then while answer is equal to no, I'm going to say, so basically what this means is that as long as the answer is equal to no, keep repeating this entire first part until the person says that, yes, this is what I've entered, this is what I want, I am sure, right? And then after that, it basically moves on, and it says if O is equal to multiplication, or addition, or subtraction, or division. Now, what it's doing over here, so it's giving you an explanation. So, like, over here I've said enter the first digit, enter the second digit. What it's doing over here is it's basically telling you what exactly the sequence calculator is going to be doing, right? And it's also explaining to you what the first digit is, what the second digit is. So it's not like there's no ambiguity in the sense, and it's kind of just getting rid of any doubts. It's kind of like an instruction almost, right? Okay. Then I say print enter the first digit and enter the second digit, and over here I have D, which is the first digit, and I have the input, and I'm converting that to an integer because obviously if you want to use mathematical operations on that, we're going to have to convert it to an integer. Then we have the second digit, so we convert it to an integer again over here. Then we have print the number of terms you need. Now xy is going to be the number of terms that are needed. Again, it should be an integer because we need that in our basically formula and stuff. Okay. Now over here, let's come to this last part. So here we have our flow control. Okay. So the very first possibility is that O is equal to multiplication, right? Now here again, I've said I've created a function, right? And I've said define ladder. Now, okay, there are a number of different words, different names that you could give to this function. I have literally just chosen ladder for absolutely no reason. You could just name it something that's more descriptive, something that's much better, but just deal with this for now, okay, please? Thank you. So, anyways, the function's name is ladder, and then inside this I say multiply by. Now what this is going to do is it's going to return D into multiply by. So here when I say multiply by is basically what D is going to be multiplied by, like practically that, right? So what you're going to multiply with the first digit by, okay? Then I'm going to say print D. So D is the first term. So if D is the first term, obviously it needs to be printed first, right? So we just say print D. Then we have 4t in range xy minus 1. Now xy is the number of terms you need, right? So the range should be xy. But because we've already printed D, right, and D is the first term, so because we've already printed D, we can just say xy minus 1, alright? So here, so if, let's say this was 8, then this would be 7, of course, right? Because obviously we've already, the 8th one, or the first one rather, is already here and it's already been printed. Okay, so we've said 4t in range xy minus 1, print ladder into SD to the power of t. Okay, here's where math comes in to a great extent, right? This is just a formula. So this is how you would do a basically geometric expression, right? So the second digit to the power of t. Now t, what is t? T is the first time or the second time. So it's almost like the term number, okay? So over here, let's see. So here, where we have 6, right? So for, okay, wait, let's take it from the second one, yeah. So for 18, the term number would be 1, right? So now let me explain this to you. So actually, if you remember now, in Python, if we say t, the term number is always going to start from 0, right? So that would be 0. So here it's going to be 1. Then here it's going to be 2. Here it's going to be 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? And that's exactly how a geometric function works, right? First you do a into r, which is, so r is our ratio to the power of n. Now n is going to be the term number. So in this case, n is equal to t, right? T is a term number. Then if we have, hold on, let me just actually write this down here, so we have a into r to the power of n, okay? So here n is equal to t. Then we have r. Now r is always the common ratio. Considering that we are going to be multiplying every single term by the second digit, so if we have, so over here, we're multiplying 6 by 3, 18 by 3, 54 by 3, and so on, right? So our common ratio becomes 3, and 3 is our second digit. So our common ratio would be the second digit in this sense, which is why we do the second digit to the power of, if you guys remember the sign, to asterisk mean exponent, or to the power of. So second digit or ratio to the power of t, or n, which is the term number, right? So that's the first part that you do. Then we have the second digit multiplied by that. So again, this is kind of how it gets. So let's say the second digit is how about we take like the same example, right? So second digit is 3, right? And so our first digit is d, okay? So for our first digit is 6, sorry. So ladder means what we're doing is we're multiplying 6 by this entire thing, right? So in this case, a would be this part, which is basically 6. A would be 6, and over here we're already saying that d multiplied by whatever this is, right? So this part, so the first part of this would be a in this part, right? Because a is always the first term in a geometric sequence. Again, I know this is a lot of complicated maths, so I think I'm just gonna leave it at that for now. If you guys want, you can look into geometric sequences a little bit more and stuff. But I guess all you have to remember this time is that this is the formula for a geometric sequence, and I have converted that into the variable form using the coding and all of that, and that's how I've done this, okay? But all you need to do is whenever you're doing something like this, or like a sequence or something, you need to remember the formula for math, right? And then you can just apply your knowledge for math into computer science, okay? So I think I'm just going to move on for now. I don't really want to extend this for too long. Then the next thing we have is addition. So for t in range xy. Now over here, this would be almost the same as what we had done for the previous calculator, right? For the simple one. So here what it's going to be is going to be d plus t into sd. So the reason we do, again, this is the formula for an arithmetic sequence, right? You need to do t into sd first, right? We need to first multiply t into sd, so the term number into the second digit. So the term number into the difference between each, right? And we've seen that that works clearly over here, like 0 into 5 plus 12, so 12 plus 0, and that's basically how it works, right? So this works, and this is basically the formula that we're going to be using. You can pause the video right now, go through each of the formulas, kind of try to understand them yourselves. If you have any questions, again, just leave a comment and I will respond to it, I promise. Anyways, so that was a formula. Again, we have another formula for subtraction. It's almost the same thing as addition, except over here, we're just switching the plus for a minus, right? And here we're just switching the subtract for an add. Okay, now this last part is this is division. Okay, again, now division is almost the same as multiplication, the code for it, I mean. So this part would be the exact same, right? This part. So instead of naming it ladder this time, I've named it spam, right? And I've said divide by. So over here, what you're doing is you're doing the return value would be d divided by this entire part, right? So d divided by whatever you're putting in the bracket of spam. Okay. So over here, what's going to happen is, again, this is going to be a geometric sequence. And again, you can just look at the formula and look up the formulas, and you'd be able to understand this a little bit better. So here again, I'm just doing SD, so the second digit, or the ratio, to the power of t, or the term number. And then I'm multiplying it by the ratio again, because I've already said print d. And then after that, I'm doing spam. So when I do spam, again, it's going to be d divided by that entire thing. And if we actually run the program and look at it, it clearly works. So let's try this. So here, actually, let's say division, and let's say yes. Let's say the first term we want to take is like 256. We're going to divide it by 2 every time, and the number of terms we want are, let's say 5. Okay, so that gives us 256, 128.0, 64, 32, and 16. Okay, so I know this is pretty much, this is quite a bit to take in, but honestly, it's really not as difficult when it comes to the coding part. It's just math where it could be a bit challenging. Honestly, what you just have to do is, in this sort of situation, you kind of just have to, like, I don't know, translate the mathematics language into computer science, into your Python language. And I know sometimes that can be difficult, and if you guys have any queries, any doubts, you guys can leave a comment, and I will definitely respond to that. Anyway, I really hope you enjoyed this video and you learned plenty. I know this was pretty overwhelming, pretty long video, but I really hope that you guys learned a lot. So I'll see you next time. Happy coding!